Welcome to The Political Economist. In today's video, we'll be delving into the terrifying world of private swamplands in Nigeria. Buckle up, because what you're about to hear will make your blood run cold. Background: the Nigerian private swamplands are nothing short of a nightmare. These areas have been unlawfully seized by private individuals and corporations with the primary goal of extracting oil and other natural resources. The Niger Delta region, with its vast reserves of oil and gas, is particularly affected, but the devastating consequences of these practices are enough to make anyone shudder with fear. Environmental horror. The environmental horror of private swamplands in Nigeria is even more staggering when one looks at the facts. Nigeria is the world's 8th largest oil producer and has an estimated 37.2 billion barrels of crude oil reserves. Most of this oil is found in the Niger Delta region, which covers an area of about 70,000 square kilometers. However, the extraction of oil and other resources from this region has caused extensive damage to the environment. It is estimated that between 9 million and 13 million barrels of oil have been spilt in the Niger Delta since oil drilling began in the region in the 1950s. This is equivalent to more than 240,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The oil spills have had a catastrophic impact on the environment, causing the loss of habitats and ecosystems, as well as contaminating the waterways and the soil. This has had a devastating impact on the local communities that rely on fishing and farming for their livelihoods. The pollution has also led to an increase in respiratory problems and other health issues among the local population. Furthermore, the environmental horror of private swamplands in Nigeria is not limited to the Niger Delta region. The impact of pollution and destruction caused by these practices extends to other areas of the country, leaving behind a trail of devastation and destruction. The environmental horror that private swamplands create is indescribable. The destruction of natural habitats in these areas are unprecedented. Countless species of plants and animals are now endangered or extinct. The damage to the ecosystem will be felt for generations to come. Oil spills and other forms of pollution are regular occurrences, creating a landscape of destruction and contamination. The local population suffers from serious health problems and water sources are contaminated. The mere thought of the environmental damage being caused by these practices is enough to make anyone's skin crawl. Social disaster. The impact of private swamplands in Nigeria extends beyond the environmental and ethical issues discussed previously. These areas have also been the site of social disasters affecting the communities living in and around these swamplands. The following are some more dark information about these social disasters. Forced evictions. The construction of pipelines, oil rigs, and other infrastructure in private swamplands has led to the forced eviction of thousands of families from their homes. These families are often given little notice and no compensation for their loss, leaving them homeless and destitute. This has led to the breakdown of social structures and the loss of community cohesion. Conflict and instability. Private swamplands in Nigeria are often the site of conflicts and instability as armed groups fight for control over the resources in these areas. This has led to a breakdown in law and order, leaving the communities living in these areas vulnerable to violence and abuse. The government's inability to address these issues has further exacerbated the problem. Poverty and inequality. The exploitation of resources in private swamplands has not translated into economic development for the communities living in these areas. Instead, it has led to poverty and inequality, with the benefits of resource extraction being concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy individuals and companies. This has led to social unrest and a sense of disenfranchisement among the local population. Health disasters. The environmental pollution and degradation caused by the extraction of resources in private swamplands have had a significant impact on the health of the local communities. The lack of access to clean water and air, coupled with the exposure to toxic chemicals, has led to an increase in respiratory problems, skin diseases, and other health issues. The lack of access to healthcare exacerbates the problem, with many people unable to access medical treatment. These social disasters are just as devastating as the environmental and ethical issues discussed earlier. They highlight the urgent need for the Nigerian government and companies operating in these areas to address the issues facing the communities living in and around these swamplands. The social impact of these disasters cannot be ignored or downplayed, and urgent action is needed to address the poverty, inequality, conflict, and health issues that these communities face. The use of heavy machinery and equipment causes damage to already weak infrastructure, making access to basic services such as healthcare and education almost impossible. The community is left to suffer in a lawless and abandoned area, alone and without hope. Unethical nightmare. The unethical practices that occur in private swamplands in Nigeria are not only an affront to human rights, but also an impediment to the economic and social development of the country. The exploitations of workers and the disregard for safety and environmental regulations are just a few of the issues facing these areas. Child labor is also a significant problem in these swamplands, with an estimated 15 million children involved in child labor in Nigeria. Many of these children are forced to work in hazardous conditions for long hours, often without pay or access to education. The corruption and bribery that occur in these swamplands are also staggering. The Nigerian government loses an estimated $12 billion per year due to corruption and tax evasion. This deprives the country of much-needed revenue that could be used to address the issues facing the communities living in and around the private swamplands. Moreover, the companies operating in these areas are not held accountable for their actions. They often bribe government officials to overlook safety and environmental violations, leaving the communities and the environment at risk. Chilling examples. Let's take a look at some of the chilling examples of the dark practices that occur in private swamplands. In 2005, a gas explosion occurred in a private swampland in Nigeria. The explosion killed at least 20 people and caused severe burns to dozens of others. This incident is just one of many examples of the horrifying dangers that workers face in these areas. In another instance, a company that operates in private swamplands has found to have been dumping toxic waste into the environment. The waste was so dangerous that it had caused birth defects and other serious health problems in local communities. The company responsible for the waste was never held accountable. The horror of private swamplands in Nigeria is not limited to oil spills, pollution, and child labor. The following are some more chilling examples of the unethical practices and environmental destruction in these areas. Gas flaring. Gas flaring is the process of burning off natural gas that is produced during oil extraction. This is a common practice in Nigeria, and it releases large amounts of carbon dioxide and other harmful gases into the atmosphere, contributing to climate change and air pollution. The communities living near these gas flares suffer from respiratory problems, skin rashes, and other health issues. Land degradation. The extraction of oil and other resources from swamplands in Nigeria has led to extensive land degradation. The soil has become contaminated with heavy metals and other toxins, making it unsuitable for farming. The loss of fertile land has led to food insecurity and poverty in the affected communities. Water pollution. The waterways in and around the private swamplands are heavily polluted, making them unsuitable for drinking, fishing, or swimming. The water is contaminated with oil spills, toxic chemicals, and waste from the extraction process. This has led to an increase in waterborne diseases and a decline in fish populations, affecting the livelihoods of the local communities. Violence and human rights abuses. Private swamplands in Nigeria are often the site of violence and human rights abuses. Armed groups, often hired by oil companies, have been known to attack local communities that resist the exploitation of their resources. Women and girls are often subjected to sexual violence, and activists and journalists who expose the corruption and unethical practices in these areas are frequently targeted. These chilling examples illustrate the devastating impact of private swamplands in Nigeria on the environment, human rights, and social development. The government and companies operating in these areas must take responsibility for their actions and work to remedy the damage they have caused. Conclusion: the private swamplands in Nigeria are a truly terrifying and catastrophic issue. The environmental and social consequences are nothing short of a horror story, and the unethical practices that occur there are the stuff of nightmares. It's time for the Nigerian government to take decisive action to address this issue before it's too late. We must raise awareness of this nightmare and demand that companies operating in these areas act ethically and responsibly. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to The Political Economist for more chilling insights into the world of economics and politics.